Remember, you are stronger than you think. Don't believe me? We're about to prove it. Welcome back. This is Jen Lee, creator and host of I Need Blue podcast. Welcome to Season 3. This is a place where survivors of life events can feel they belong, are loved, understood, and my favorite, empowered. Sharing your story can become a part of your healing journey. I Need Blue is here to provide you the opportunity. Please note, I Need Blue does contain sensitive topics which could be triggering. Please seek help if needed, and remember, you always come first. I would like to thank Shar Good for composing and performing the introduction music. To find additional information about Shar Good, you can visit my website, www.ineedblue.net. There, you will find ways to contact me. You will find all of my podcast episodes as well as valuable resources. I Need Blue podcast is also found on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Let's get started with today's guest. I, like many Americans, will never forget this day. I had just dropped off my oldest son to preschool. He was 4 at the time. I had arrived home with his younger brother, who was 1. It was September 11th, 2001, shortly after 9 a.m. I turned on the TV, and what I saw left me not only speechless, but motionless. It is a moment I will never forget. My guest today, Ari Schonbrun, worked in Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. He was in the elevator headed to the 101st floor when a blast shook the building. The elevator stopped on the 78th floor. The scene I was observing on TV, he was living real time. He is here to share those moments with us and how surviving 9/11 changed his life. Ari is retired now, and as a motivational speaker, author, life coach, and the podcast host of Whispers and Bricks, he uses these platforms to share his story of miracles, fate, and inspiration. Ari, thank you for being my guest, and welcome to the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I was very excited to be on your podcast. Looking forward to it. You know, things are wonderful. Life is good.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you how you are feeling today, and I love the word wonderful. That is great. And like we were discussing, it's November and we're preparing for a hurricane right now, so that's interesting, but it goes with the territory.
I hear that.
So this experience, surviving 9/11, was a brush with death. Like I said, I was watching it on TV like a movie, and you were actually on the set of the movie like an actor going through it. It was crazy. It was very much life or death for you. That morning, there was a series of coincidences that happened that I think are really important to share. So why don't we go ahead and start talking about your morning of September 11th, 2001.
Sure. So it was 20 to 7 in the morning. I had my briefcase over my shoulder. I had my cup of coffee in my hands. And I yelled up to my wife, bye, hon, love you, see ya. I yelled up to my kids, bye, kids, have a great day in school. And I started to walk out the door. And my wife yells down to me from our second floor, and she says, did you do Baruch's book order? Now, Baruch is my third child. He was 8 years old at the time. And that's when I discovered that teachers have a wonderful way of torturing parents. It's called the Scholastic Book Order.
Oh, I loved those.
Well, my son's book order was due, And my wife, who was a school principal, was busy getting school open, and she was getting ready for the Jewish holidays that were all coming up. And she just didn't have the time or the patience for him. And she said that it's my job to do it. And I said, sure. Unfortunately, I hadn't done it. And she yells to me, she says to me, you're not leaving the house until you do the book order. So I put my briefcase down, put my cup of coffee down, and proceeded to, walked into my kitchen and proceeded to negotiate with my 8-year-old for the next 20 minutes. I whittled him down to 2 books.
Wow, that's good.
That was really good. Interestingly enough, the 2 books that he picked were from a series called Survivor.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, you talk about coincidences. And by the way, what's really important here is the book order was actually due on Monday, but my son left his pamphlet in school on Friday. So my wife wrote a note to the teacher on Monday asking if he can have an extra day. And the teacher sent back, a note saying, sure. And she made sure to put the pamphlet into his knapsack. Had my son brought that pamphlet home on Friday, I would have done it with him on Sunday. And I would have been sitting at my desk at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. And you'd be sitting here interviewing somebody else because I'd be dead. But because he left his pamphlet in school on Friday, I am here to tell you my story today.
How does that make you feel? Like, when did it hit you that, oh my gosh, if my son didn't need me to fill out that book report, I wouldn't be here today?
Yeah, you're going to see throughout my story, there are a whole bunch of coincidences like that happened. And at the end of the day, when I started to review everything that had happened, I realized that as an Orthodox Jew, God was just looking out for me that day. That's all I can say. That's my belief, and it's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I'm not going to argue.
There you go.
I'm not going to argue.
I filled out the tear sheet, and I wrote the check, put it into his knapsack, and I picked up my briefcase, picked up my cold cup of coffee, and out the door I go. I get to the Trade Center at 20 minutes to 9. My office is on the 101st floor. And you couldn't take an elevator from the lobby all the way to 101. You had to take an elevator to, it was an express elevator to the 78th floor, which was a sky lobby. And then in the sky lobby, all there were like escalators and elevators. And you would change to take an elevator or an escalator up to the higher floors. So I was sitting and waiting for the first elevator to come down. The first elevator that came down was all the way on the right side of the lobby. So I ran down to the end of the lobby and I got into the elevator, took it up to 78, and on 78 got out. And the elevator that I needed now to get to my office on 101 was all the way on the left side of the sky lobby. So I hung a left, started walking to the bank of elevators that I needed to get to get to my office. And I was about 8 feet from those banks of elevators when, as best as I could describe, there was an explosion. I thought a bomb had gone off in the elevator.
There were people around you, like a lot of people?
I didn't see a lot of people, but there were people because, when that plane hit, the lights went out, the place filled with smoke, and I was literally thrown off my feet. The entire building shook. It was crazy. So I really wasn't paying attention to who was around me, but I'm on the ground, and I looked between the large banks of elevators, and I saw there was a light on, and I assumed it was an emergency light because all the lights had gone out. So I decided to go there, but there was a lot of smoke. And I remember as a kid, what do you do when there's a lot of smoke? You stay low to the ground, right? Well, that's what I did. I crawled from where I was to that light. I stood up and I went behind the bank of elevators, and there was a door there, and I opened the door. Turns out there was a security office on that floor. Now, I'd been in that building for the better part of 8 years, and I never knew there was an office there. But I walked into that office, and sitting on the ground with her back to the wall was this woman security guard, and she was crying her eyes out. And I leaned over to her and I said to her, ma'am, calm down. We're going to be okay. We're going to get out of here. And she calmed down, and I walked inside, and there was the fire warden for the floor. Just as a point of information for your audience, every floor in the building had a person who was designated as the quote-unquote fire warden. He was the person that in case of emergency, management would call him, or if he sees something, he would call management. He was the go-to guy, and he would disseminate all the information. So I ran over to him and I said to him, what do we do? Where do we go? He looks at me and goes, I don't know. Of course he didn't know. We had no idea what had happened. So, he's trying the phones. The landlines were dead. The cell phones were dead. There was no reception. And so I went back out into the hall to see if I can find a way out. And I bumped into a coworker of mine. Her name was Virginia DiChiara. Virginia was on the elevator that I was about to get on when that plane hit. And as she described it to me, when the plane hit, the walls of the elevator collapsed, the ceiling collapsed. There was a cable in the elevator that snapped. It was sparking in the elevator. The jet fuel had come down the sides of the elevator, and they were ignited by the sparking, and there was a wall of fire. There were 3 people in that elevator. There was Roy Bell, Virginia, and Renee. Roy Bell was the first one to jump through the fire, and he suffered second-degree burns. Virginia jumped out right after him, and she suffered third-degree burns. And Renee, she died from her burns. All in a space of 6, 8, 10 seconds. That was it.
Wow.
That was the difference between life and death that day, at least for these 3 people. Virginia sees me and she says to me, Ari, please help me. And whatever you do, please don't leave me. I'm in so much pain. And I said, Virginia, I promise I will not leave you, and we will get out of here. Now, here's the irony. Virginia and I were not good friends. She was hired a year before by Cantor Fitzgerald, and she was an internal auditor, and she almost got me fired. And there we were. And I had a decision. I had a choice, and I had a decision to make. Do I just say to heck with you, lady, and just save my own skin? Or do I help her? Well, I did the right thing. I helped her, and I said to her, Virginia, I promise I will help you, and I will not leave you, and we will get out of here. The fire warden ultimately told us we can get out, stairwell on the left. We went back into the hall. We found the stairwell, and I remember looking into the stairwell, and I saw there were lights on in the stairwell. And they must have been like emergency lights, because the lights otherwise had gone out. And I turned around. There were myself, Roy Bell, Virginia, and the fire warden, and about 6 or 8 other people. And I remember turning and asking, does anybody have a flashlight? Because if those emergency lights go out, it'll be in the middle of the building, in the middle of the stairwell. It's going to be pitch black. And 2 people actually had flashlights, which surprised the heck out of me, because I'm thinking, why do you have a flashlight? But I said, people, if the lights go out, nobody panic. We will have light. And the next thing I did was I looked down at Virginia's feet, and I said, thank God she's wearing flats. There were high-heeled shoes all the way down in that stairwell. Women had kicked them off to get down as fast as they possibly could.
Oh, I bet. Absolutely.
So I said to her, Virginia, okay, you ready? Let's go. And we walked in a straight line. We walked, it was the fire warden, Roy Bell, myself, and Virginia. And we walked that way because I turned to Virginia. I said, if you feel faint, if you feel like you're going to fall forward, fall on me, and I'll carry you. And we started to head down. We got down 3 flights of stairs, and one of the biggest miracles of the day happened to me, other than the fact that I wasn't killed when the plane hit. My cell phone rang. Now, people listening today are going to go like, so what? What's the big deal? Well, back then in the World Trade Center, you could never, ever get signal. No reception. I remember standing in my office by the window going, hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? It was just, there was no signal. And here I was on a day there was no signal, in the middle of the building, in the middle of a stairwell, and my phone rang. I was so shocked. I picked it up. I went, hello? It was my wife on the other end of that phone. And she was crying, and she was telling me something about a plane going into the building. I had no idea what she was talking about. And I said to her, Joyce, I'm on the 75th floor. I'm in a stairwell. I'm on my way down. Now is not a good time. I said, I'll call you when I get out of the building, and I hung up the phone, not realizing, of course, it would be hours until I spoke to her again.
Wow. So even when she said there was a plane that went into the building, like that still to you was like, oh, not my building. Like, what were you thinking?
Oh, very simple. When she told me the plane went into the building, there were always these little Piper Cubs, Cessnas, and the like that were always flying around the building, usually lower than we were, And I figured, all right, one of those planes went into the building. That's what I thought. Shouldn't have time to go into a whole description. Well, it was a 747 and it was, So Roy Bell says to me, oh, my God, he says, can I borrow your phone to call my wife? I said, of course. I handed him the phone. He dialed. He hit send. Nothing. Dead. I literally looked up and I said, thank you, God. Because at least, it was a miracle.
Absolutely.
So we continued on down. We got down to the 50th floor. Virginia says, I can't do it. Can't go on. And my first instinct was I'll have her sit down. And we'll rest, and then we'll get up and keep going. And then I thought to myself, you know what? If she sits down, she may never get up. And if she doesn't get up, she's going to die. And I went like, not on my watch, lady.
Yeah, I think to remind the audience, as you are now on the 50th floor, like I get tired thinking of 10 floors. And you started at 78. Yeah. Now you're at 50. Like that is quite the journey.
Right. I said to Virginia, you can do this. And we had some water that we gave her to drink, and we poured it on her arms to help relieve, from the burns. I'm starting to count down floors now, 45, 44, 42. We're doing great. We're doing great. And we were doing great until 38. 38 was backed up with people. You see, the firefighters had stopped the people from going down because they were going up to put out the fire. And I remember that it was a big crowd. And as we were coming down, a woman in the crowd turned around. She heard our footsteps. So she turned around to see who was there. And she saw Virginia, and she went like, oh, oh. And it was like, Virginia says to me, Ari, how bad is it? I said, Virginia, you look great.
That was the perfect answer at that time. Perfect answer.
Yeah. Look, I needed to keep her spirits up. I couldn't help her medically, but I needed to keep her spirits up. But I was scared. So I started to yell out, is there a paramedic in the building? I have a burn victim here. If you're a paramedic, please help us. And if not, please step to the right and let us through. And they did. People squeezed over as much as possible and literally opened a path to come down. So we went down. We got down to the first floor, and the fire warden keeps going down. I said, where are you going? He says, we have to get out through the garage. I turned to Virginia. I said, we just came down 78 flights of stairs. What's another 4 or 5? And we continued down. We got down 2 more flights, and all of a sudden the door on the first floor opens up. And some guy yells out, where are you people going? I said, we're going out through the garage. He says, no, you can't get out through the garage. You got to come back up here and come out through the first floor. I told Virginia, we got to go back up 2 flights. She said a few things that I can't say in mixed company.
That's okay.
And we headed back up. Now, here's the interesting part. I learned later there were people in that garage that never got out. Who was the guy who opened the door? I don't know. I never saw him. I only heard a voice. And why did he pick that moment to open the door? I have no idea. But that guy, whatever he or it was, saved our lives that day.
Wow.
So we get out on the first floor. There were police and firefighters there, and they were telling us to go out through the mall and through the stores. And, it was a very, very long walk to get out. While we're walking, Virginia says to me, Ari, do me a favor, call my mom, tell her I'm okay. I said, I'll do that. Give me the number. I punched it into my phone. I said, let's get out of the building first. And it was literally raining in the building because of the sprinklers. And I remember Virginia telling me every time a drop hit her arm, she said it was like a knife going through her arm. That's how bad the burns were. We finally get out, and it put us out on Church Street. And there were police and firefighters, and they were telling everybody, uptown, everybody, and people were running uptown. And I stopped the cop, and I said, I have a burn victim here. Where do we go? He said, go across the street in front of Millennium Hotel. There's going to be a triage center there. And you'll be able to get her into an ambulance. So that's what we did. We went across the street, and sure enough, an ambulance pulls up. I help her into the ambulance, and I breathe a sigh of relief because at least now I know that she's getting medical attention. I couldn't help her that way. The only thing I could do is keep her spirits up. We get her into the ambulance. I turn around, I look up at the building, and there was a guy standing next to me, and I said to him, "Excuse me, how did building 2 get on fire?" And the guy looks at me like I'm crazy. He goes, "What are you talking about?" He goes, 2 jetliners went into the buildings. They're calling it a terrorist attack. I look at him like he's crazy. "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Yeah." I'm starting to really run scared now. This is a terrorist attack. This is not good. I turn around and the ambulance is still sitting there. So I walked over and I went like, "Why aren't you leaving?" He goes, "We can't leave until we fill the ambulance." They were expecting a huge amount of casualties, and they weren't leaving until they filled the ambulance with 6, 7, 8 people, whatever it could hold. Virginia is writhing in pain. She says, "Ari, I'm not going to make it." I said, "Virginia, hold on. You're going to be fine. Hold on." Finally, they filled the ambulance, and he goes, "Okay, we're ready to roll." Virginia turns to me. She says to me, "Ari, you're coming with us." Now, I don't want to say that I was in a comfort zone, but the reality is I knew where I was, and if I had to get someplace else, I would be able to do that, all right? Because I know how to get to wherever it is that I needed to get to. And the thought of getting into an ambulance and going God knows where did not excite me. And besides, when that ambulance leaves, there's only one place I'm going, and that's back into the building. Because remember, I left, I didn't know how many at the time, but, as far as I was concerned, there were 960 people up in our headquarters, and those are my friends and coworkers, and, I'm looking to help. Virginia turns to the ambulance driver and says, "We're not leaving unless he comes with us." And the ambulance driver looks at me, I look at him, and he's thinking, I see it in his eyes, he's thinking this is not a cab service. I'm thinking I don't need a cab. But I said, "You know what, maybe for our own psychological well-being, maybe I should just, go with her." He goes, "Fine, hop into the front." I got into the front of that ambulance and we pulled away. We were one of only a few ambulances that actually got away from the scene that day. It was a day that changed my life. There's another hour's worth of story, but, we don't obviously have the time for that. But the reality is I got home at 5:30 in the afternoon. There were 20 people in my living room and I had no less than 100 phone messages. I learned something very important that day. You have no idea how many friends you really have until they all think you're dead.
That's true. I have to tell you that in listening to you, I love just the positiveness. You have this little humor. It works. It's amazing. I love listening to you tell your story. It's so serious. I'm sitting here not moving and I'm listening to you, but every now and then you throw in that little
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Oh, look, you know what? It's not something that I made up. These were things that were happening. These are things that, this is what was going on. But the reality is I did learn a lot that day. I realized how important my family really was. All right. It used to be my job was the most important thing. And after that day, it was my family. My life turned around completely. I totally changed. I became a different human being. I realized that I was literally plucked out of a burning, collapsing building and given a second chance. And I said, I'm going to make the most of this second chance. I took upon myself stuff like, I said, I'm not going to curse anymore. I don't need to have a quote unquote filthy mouth. And because I made that decision, what happened was there were people around me. If we were in a meeting or we were in my office and we whatever, nobody would curse because everybody knew that Ari Schonbrun doesn't curse. So look at the effect that I had on other people because I made a decision. And all the decisions, little decisions that I made, a lot of them I made after careful thought, talking to people. I never blurted stuff out. You're in the middle of a conversation, somebody says something, you get ticked or whatever, and you blurt something out. Maybe you should have, maybe you shouldn't have. All right. But before I say or do anything, I always think to myself, what am I going to accomplish? If I make this next statement, is what's going to happen? If I felt the effect was going to be bad, I wouldn't say it. a lot of times I just let things go. I let things slide.
Ari, I'm going to take a quick break. I want to thank the listeners. I appreciate your support, and I hope as you listen to this episode or any episode, you're able to find one person to share it with as a resource. I find many times we have friends who don't like listening to information. They prefer to read it. Exciting news. For you, I have started a book series tied into this podcast. The first book is now available on my website, ineedblue.net. From there, I will send you an autographed copy. Or the book is available on Amazon. It's called Why I Survived, How Sharing My Story Helped Me Heal from Dating Abuse, Armed Robbery, Abduction, and Other Forms of Trauma by Jennifer Lee. It is my story, and like this podcast, it is filled with valuable information and resources. Check it out today, and again, thank you for all the ways you support me and the I Need Blue podcast. So you have self-awareness and discipline now that you kind of you think before you speak?
Correct. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And it's, I know I feel better about it. People appreciate the fact that most of the time it's just a kind word. I like to make people laugh. My son, actually, Baruch, who's my third child, who is who started this whole thing. All right. He has these little cards. It says, keep smiling. And he hands them out to people.
I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And it's so simple, Ari. It's so simple.
Yeah.
Can I ask you?
You can ask me anything you want.
Great. I know with the robbery during it, I realized that we are way more aware of our surroundings than we realize until we're forced to recall it. During the event, whether it be the elevator or helping Virginia, the stairwell, were there things in particular that you remember hearing or smelling that maybe to this day are still a trigger?
I don't really need a trigger because it's always on my mind. It's always in the back of my mind. It just never goes away. It just doesn't. Every so often I live in Long Island, and I live right near Kennedy Airport. We have planes going overhead, but when you live here, as long as I have, you totally ignore the planes. You don't mean anything. But every so often I'll hear a plane, I'll look up. It'll just remind me of 9/11. It's just because it was a plane, and they fly very low because they're coming in for a landing. So something like that. But for the most part, like I said, it's always in the back of my mind. So it's not something that you forget or that you need to be reminded of.
And you're not trained to handle situations like that. How did you not panic?
I've gotten that question, and I'll tell you what I firmly believe is that, number one, there was nobody else, including the fire warden, all right, who was taking charge. So I said, nobody's taking charge. I'm it. I just took it upon myself. It's not that I knew what to do, but there was a lot of instinct. All right. Instinctively, I knew what to do. Adrenaline wise, that's what kept me going. And I don't know. It was just like I said, there was nobody else. It was me or nobody. So I stepped up. I just took charge. I'd like to think that with everything that I did, anybody else in my shoes would have done the same thing. That's what I like to think. People call me a hero. I hate that. All right. But then again, what is a hero? A hero is an ordinary person doing an extraordinary thing. That's what a hero is. Okay. So I'm an ordinary person. Okay. I don't know that what I did was extraordinary. I was just, doing my best.
You were trying to survive, but then also help other people survive as well. That's pretty extraordinary.
I'll take it.
That's good. How did you explain this to your wife and your kids when you finally made it home?
Well, my wife knew what was going on. Remember, she spoke to me after the plane hit, so she knew that I wasn't killed. And when I got home, I basically told her the story. My kids, it's interesting. It's interesting the reaction that people have. So I had 4 children at the time. I now have 5, but I had 4 children at the time, and they were 6, 8, 13, and 15. On that day, my kids went to a private school. They went to yeshiva, and they were dismissed early, and they went home, and there had to be an adult at the house in order to take the child off the bus. Otherwise, they wouldn't let them go. But my wife was home. So Avrami and Baruch, my 2 boys, 6 and 8, they didn't really understand. They didn't know what was going on. They knew there was something, but they didn't really understand. There wasn't much to explain to them. You know, a plane went into the building. But my 15-year-old, I'll start with her. She was in class. And when the teacher comes in, she comes in and all in a panic saying, "Oh my God, girls, you're not going to believe this. A plane just went into the World Trade Center. People are jumping out of windows." And blah. And my daughter was sitting in the back of the room. And her friend who was sitting next to her went like, "Honey, doesn't your father work in the World Trade Center?" And the teacher overheard and says, "Oh my God, honey, your dad works in the World Trade Center." She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, you should call somebody." And she says, this is amazing. She says, "Who would you like me to call?" And the teacher looks at her and says, "What do you mean? You got to call somebody." She goes, "Look, if my dad's dead, he's not picking up the phone. And if my mom hasn't heard about it yet, I'm not going to be the one to tell her. So who would you like me to call?" And the teacher stood there frozen, literally. She ultimately convinced my daughter to go out and call my wife, which she did, and then the 2 of them were crying on the phone. But with Chani, everything was black and white. There was no, today she's an OBGYN, sharp kid. Now, Ricky who was my second daughter, she was a shopaholic. She loved to shop. She comes home and she goes, "Mom, I heard something about the World Trade Center, and my wife says, "I spoke to Daddy. He's on his way home. He's fine." And she goes, "But I heard the buildings collapsed. Is Daddy okay? Are you sure? You sure?" She says, "Yes, Daddy's okay." She goes, "Oh, thank God." And she starts to walk up the stairs to her room, and then she stops, she turns around, she goes, "What happened to all the stores?" Once Daddy was okay, then it's weird. What happened to the stores? Yeah,
Kids say the darndest things.
So those were the reactions of my children.
I know you were in the ambulance and they had left, but witnessing the collapse of the tower was horrendous, and the people coming out covered in dust and just everything else. Did you see the tower collapse?
No, I didn't. When we got to the hospital, and I brought Virginia in, and then they threw me out of the hospital because I wasn't a relative, which is another whole story. As I'm walking out of the hospital, I heard somebody go, "Wow, did you hear? Tower 2 collapsed." And from St. Vincent's Hospital, where I was, you had a clear view straight down to the Trade Center, and sure enough, Tower 2 was gone. It was unbelievable. I didn't see it fall, but it was gone.
What was it like then for you the next morning after when you woke up?
The morning after, my wife went to school, to work. My kids went to school, and I was sitting home alone. I put the TV on. I'm watching the buildings collapse over and over and over and over again. Drove me crazy. I had a very bad smoky taste in my mouth. I remember that. I called the doctor, and the nurse picks up, and I said, "Hi, it's Ari Schonbrun. I need an appointment to see the doctor." And the doctor said it was just like residual smoke. My lungs were fine, everything was fine. But, I was scared. And that night, I called my boss. I found out my boss was alive. We had a spreadsheet going around as to known to be alive, known to be dead, and unknown. And I said, John, where are we working? Because I can't sit here at home, by myself. I can't do it. He said, fine, come in. And I did. And it was a small office, and we jerry-rigged phones and tables and chairs and whatnot. Yeah, so that's what it was. So I went back to work on Thursday, and I never looked back. And I left Wall Street 5.5 years ago. In April of 2017, I left Wall Street. And that's when I started. Not that I started. I had been doing public speaking since 9/11, but this is when I decided to do it full time. And I went full time in that. And then I started a podcast, and then I started a coaching business. And here we are today.
And you have spoke at the UN?
Oh, I did. Yes. It was all about victims of terror and, how to support survivors, because the survivors got the feeling that nobody cared about them. It's like, yes, the people that are gone and the people that their families, they deserve compensation, they deserve their help. But survivors, it's like, oh, you're okay, so you don't need anything. To this day, it's a big problem. So the UN had this commission on, survivors of terrorism, and I got to speak. It was only 3 minutes, but hey, how many people get to speak at the UN?
Oh, absolutely. So you got your message out. What were you looking to gain from that 3 minutes?
That people should understand that even though I might look perfectly normal and healthy on the outside, I'm not good on the inside. I don't mean me specifically. I'm just talking about a survivor. That's why I got onto the board of directors of this charity organization called Strength to Strength. They work with victims of terror globally. So they're worried about not only the people who suffered because of whatever terrorism they went through, but the survivors as well, where everybody says, you know what, you survived, you're okay. See what the countries, the globe can do to help these people in times of trauma.
And aside from getting back to work, what did you need right after surviving 9/11?
I had everything I needed. I had my family. They surrounded me. I'll tell you a little story. We had like a memorial service in Central Park, and I was going to go. And my wife says to me, take the girls with you. And I said, why do I need to take the girls with me? And my wife says, just take the girls with you. I said, I don't need to take the girls with me. And my kids, my two daughters come and they say, Dad, come on, we want to go with you. We want to go with you. We want to be with you. I'm like, all right, fine, come. And they came with me. We got there and, they had a very, very moving service. Carole King came. She played You've Got a Friend. It was great. After everything was over, they read the names and they had scrolling pictures of all the people. And that's when I lost it. I just totally broke down, and my girls were there and they hugged me and, Dad, it's okay. I was so happy that they were there because I needed them.
That is awesome. When 9/11 comes around every year now, is there something you do in particular?
I'll tell you what I used to do. For the first couple of years, the office closed on 9/11, and I just wanted to be alone with my thoughts. So I used to go out and I used to play golf by myself. All right. And there's no place better, to be by yourself. And, it's so beautiful.
Was there anything else that you did for your mental health?
I'll never forget it, but I'm not going to be held back by it. All right. It happened. I lived through it. I've mourned, and life goes on. You just got to keep going.
Absolutely. I know it's been a while, but are you in touch with Virginia or anybody else from that day?
Okay, so absolutely I'm in touch with Virginia. We have become very good friends. She actually moved down to Florida. We actually exchange gifts on Christmas and Hanukkah. Every time she comes up to New York, we get together, we have a cup of coffee, we have lunch, we sit, we schmooze. We talk to each other every year on 9/11 itself, no matter where we are in the world.
It's amazing. Is there anything about 9/11 that you want people to know that they don't know? Or isn't talked about enough, a special message?
The only message I have really is don't take life for granted. People need to understand life's short. You can't take anything for granted. Live every day like it's your last. You'll be pretty happy.
I think those are great words of wisdom.
Thank you.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the conversation. Let's talk about Whispers and Bricks, your podcast.
So Whispers and Bricks, I started because I knew that there are people out there that have fought through issues and have turned their lives around, fought through the cancer, they fought through the loss of a child. You know, I would find these people and I would invite them to be on my show because I want the rest of the world to know there are a lot of people that are going through what, like I said to a guest, there's a lot of people going through what you went through. Okay. But when you're going through it, you think you're the only one in the world going through it. And I don't want my audience to think that. I want them to know that they are not alone, that there are other people that have gone through what they're going through, and that there is a way out. It's just a message of hope to all these people. You know, we went from like 4 or 5 downloads a day to 10 downloads a day to 100 downloads a day to, 500 downloads a day. You know, people are just looking for a message, looking for the hope, and that's what we give them. And then I started the coaching because people went like, okay, great. I get it. I can get through it, but I need help doing that. Okay. Not a problem. I'll coach you. It was like one thing led to another, but the biggest thing for me is the speaking. When I speak to an audience of 2,000 people, I know I'm making a difference. And that to me is so important. And it's a feel good type of thing because, people have come up to me and said to me, wow, you've changed my life. And that's a scary thought when somebody can come up to you and say, you changed my life. That's powerful. I try to instill in people that they need to make some changes in their lives and they need to make some decisions. Every action or every decision that you make has an effect in some way, shape, or form, whether it's for the good or the bad. Look, we today are in a very sad state, okay? Globally, we're in a sad state. The whole world is going crazy. And we need to make some changes. But I tell people, the change starts with you. You have to change first before you can start changing the world. The change has to start with you. And if you need help with that, and I'll leave that with your audience as well. If they need help with that, that's part of what I do when I coach. I help people understand how to make their lives better. All right. And it may not necessarily be a better job or more money, whatever it is. It's spending the afternoon with taking your kid to the ball game, going to the zoo.
I think it's great that your religion helps to prioritize that special time for you. I think everybody needs to find that priority in their life. What is going to motivate you to take that time away from electronics and dedicate it to your religious beliefs or your family, whatever is important. I think that's great.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Like I said, as an Orthodox Jew, when the Sabbath rolls around, when Friday night, when that sun goes down, right? And the Sabbath starts and it doesn't end until 25 hours later on Saturday night. Okay. There's no TV, there's no phones, there's nothing, there's no movies. There's nothing. All there is, we go to synagogue and we pray. We have family dinner. We have family lunch. And my wife and I started playing Bananagrams. It's a great game. It's the time that, it recharges our batteries, basically. It's that 25 hours of being disconnected from the world is the most beautiful thing ever.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to add? I really enjoyed this.
Oh, I enjoyed it as well. Whispersandbricks.com, my podcast, my coaching. If you want to reach me, go to www.callwithari.com. That'll take you right into my calendar. You can book a time with me. First call is always free. 15-minute call. I can tell you if we are ready to work with each other or not. And if it doesn't work for us, it doesn't work for us. It's not like, I'm trying to get you or your money or whatever it is. A lot of people, there are a lot of scam artists out there. Let's be real. So that's my Whispers and Bricks Coaching Academy. And if anybody needs a speaker, I'm booking into 2023 already, into June already. Just reach out to me. You can find me at www.arischonbrun.com. That is ARISCHONBRUN.com. Lots of luck.
And I will put all of that information in the show notes as well, so it'll be easily found for our audience.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Ari, thank you for being my guest today on the I Need Blue podcast.
Thank you so much, and good luck with everything that you're doing. I know it's a lot, and you should keep doing what you're doing because the world needs your podcast.
And the world needs yours as well. All right, Ari, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Jen Lee with the I Need Blue podcast. To find all of my episodes, valuable resources, photos, all kinds of fun stuff, visit my website, www.ineedblue.net. And remember, you are stronger than you think.